Thanks for hitting record, Clyde. Got that. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. Hey, is everybody doing okay today? Hey, Earl, how are you?
Oh, I'm well enough. I'm eating lunch.
Well enough is, please. Lunch is important. Hey, Alex, nice to have you today.
Hey, Rachel, glad to be here.
Good, thank you. Hey, Ronnie, you doing okay? Oh, might not be able to come off mute. Welcome, John. Welcome, Ruth. John Clark and John Leo, welcome. Welcome, Paul. Thank you for joining us today. Hey, Devin. Hey, Ross. Hey, Ryan. Thanks, Earl. For folks who are just now joining, feel free to go ahead and put your name in the chat pod with your organizational affiliation. Hey, Pat, thanks for joining today.
You bet. Glad to be here.
Let me see. I know we've got Ross here. I'm looking for Bridget, and we've got Bridget too. Okay, Ross and Bridget, do I have y'all's okay to get started?
Yes, please do.
All righty.
Yep, I'm good to go.
Okie dokie. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen then, and we will get this thing kicked off. Okay, so my name is Rachel Sanderson, and I'm the Region 7 Watershed Coordinator for the Louisiana Watershed Initiative, and I work at Capital Region Planning Commission. This is the LWI Region 7 Regional Steering Committee meeting. Sometimes we'll call it RSC. And there are a lot of people who will be talking today as a part of our agenda who also help to make this meeting possible. So we also have Kim Marisak, Jamie Setz, and Rochelle Trahan with CRPC. Rochelle is specifically going to be providing support for notes, which is a huge job. So thank you very much, Rochelle. We appreciate you. We have Pat Forbes and Nicolette Jones with OCD here with us today as well to provide a couple of updates and support. We also have Tori Lynn, who's going to be joining us, I think, a little bit later on. She's going to be tag teaming notes with Rochelle as well. And as a reminder, she is a student at LSU, has been supporting Dr. Dalfitz's work, and is also an LWI intern with us. We're going to have Dr. Barry Keim, who is also with LSU, presenting on his research today. So we're really grateful for that. We also have Dr. Ihab Maseli, as well as Dr. Iman Habib with Tulane and ULL, and perhaps some other members of their team presenting on the model use, storage, and maintenance plan today. And then we have Clyde Bairden today, who is with Spears Group, who is a consultant with OCD who's providing logistical support. So if you have any issues with Zoom or anything, please put that in the chat pod, and Clyde will work straight away to get you supported. So our agenda for today, which has been sent out through email to our steering committee members, as well as through emails from Constant Contact, as well as being linked to other things on social media, is introductions and meeting logistics. We're going to go over past meetings, recaps, reminders, and updates. As mentioned, Dr. Barry Keim will be presenting, the model use, storage, and maintenance plan team will be presenting. And then we also have draft membership structures. We're going to continue that discussion today. And then we have public comments and closeout. So as a reminder, this meeting does adhere to Louisiana open meetings requirements. It's observable to the public, and we have that opportunity as noted on our agenda for public comments. So we do ask that anybody who is not on the agenda and who's not a regional steering committee member, if you come off mute, we ask you to do that during the public comment section of today's meeting. Any comments that are in the chat pod are considered public comments. So just please note that. That's a way that you can interact and engage with us in the meantime. We are recording this meeting presently. As a reminder, all of our meeting recordings can be found on crpcla.org. And if you click on the Region 7 Watershed tab, that's at the top of the page, there's a previous events archive. So we put all of our meeting minutes and everything up on that webpage. If you want to use your video camera, we encourage that. We also understand that people are tired and also people have some bandwidth issues following Hurricane Ida. So that's a reality that we also recognize during right now. We've said all those things. So our shared agreements, as a reminder, these are just ways of engagement for how we're going to interact with one another. And so we might revisit these from time to time, but we aspire to be brief and meaningful when voicing opinions, to seek common ground and understanding, to consider what serves the benefit of the entire region, and when presenting a challenge, offer a solution. We also have the idea marina, and so if there's something that comes up in discussion that's not necessarily related to the agenda at this moment in time, we put that in the idea marina to revisit at a later date. Okay, I think we are ready to do roll call now. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order by parish affiliation and then by organizational affiliation. So do we have Ruth Phillips and or Ron Savoy with Ascension Parish?
Ruth Phillips is present as well as Jerome Fournier.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Ruth. Hey, Jerome. Make note of that. Tom Stevens and or Fred Rayford with East Baton Rouge.
I'm not sure if they're here, but Robert Joyner is here for Baton Rouge.
Perfect. Thank you, Robert. James Stewart and or Joni Stone with East Feliciana. Okay. John Clark with Iberville.
Here.
Great. Thanks for being here, John. Steve Kistler and or Mark Harrell with Livingston. Okay, we will keep an eye out for Steve or Mark throughout the meeting. Earl Mathern or Stephanie Bruning with St. Charles.
It's Earl, I'm here.
Okay. Thanks, Earl. Major Coleman and or Jeremy Williams with St. Helena. Okay, we will be on the lookout for them as well. Ryan Donahue and or Ryan LaRousse with St. James.
Ryan Donahue's here.
Hey, Ryan, thanks for joining today. And y'all might see me looking down sometimes. I'm taking notes or looking at the timer. So just please know that I'm still here and still listening. Tara Lambeth or Renee Pasterek with St. John.
Hi, Tara's here.
Hey, Tara. Thanks for being here. Ross Liner and or Jay Watson with St. Tammany.
Yep, Ross is here.
Great, thanks, Ross. Bridget Bailey and or Melissa Cowart with Tangibella.
Bridget's here.
Thanks, Bridget. Bobby Joe Breland and or Alex Sumrall of Washington.
Alex is here.
Thanks, Alex. Gary Migo and or Emily Cobb with West Feliciana.
Gary's here.
Thanks, Gary.
Well,
All right, and then oh, go ahead. Sorry, didn't mean to cut anybody off. Dima Reichier and or Larry Bankston with Amy River Basin Commission.
I am here, Dietmar.
And I'm here,
Thanks,
Jenna,
Dietmar.
for Larry.
Thanks, Jenna. Karen Zito and or Diane Baum with Home Builders Association of Greater Baton Rouge. Okay, we'll be on the lookout for Karen. And then Ronnie Carter and or Kim Coates.
Ronnie Carter's here.
Hey, Ronnie, thanks for being here. And then Ivy Matthew. Okay, well, we will be on the lookout for Ivy. Oh, hey,
Hi,
Ivy.
hi. Yeah, I'm here, present and on the phone.
Great. Thanks, Ivy. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate everybody being here today. We know that there's a lot of other things that are going on today, so we just appreciate the time that you have to offer today. So again, thank you for being with us today. We know that especially in the post-Ida context that there are a lot of additional challenges for people to be able to attend these meetings. So just wanted to acknowledge that. And I guess I just kind of wanted to ask how everybody's doing post-Ida, and Ross and Bridget, I don't know if either or both of y'all wanted to say anything thank yous or anything related to Ida in that context?
No, just in recovery mode in St. Tammany. I mean, we're a wide-ranging parish, whether it's coastal or inland. So we have a lot of challenges ahead of us for the next few weeks, but I'm sure we have a lot better than the bayou parishes and river parishes. So count ourselves, pretty lucky up here.
This is Bridget. We're sort of in the same boat. We're gearing up for some of the long-term recovery at this point in time. We still have some of the disaster response groups working over in our parish, doing some cleanup, debris cleanup for the time being, but we're really gearing up for the long haul over the next several months to help with the repairs. We got hit pretty hard with lots of wind damage and some flooding as well. So we're just trying to pull it back together.
Thanks, y'all. How's everybody else doing? Our folks in the river parishes, I know y'all were hit really hard too. Everything starting to progress, or?
Hey, this is Earl. Slowly. It's coming along. We had a lot of wind damage. Probably 98% of the structures in the parish have been documented with at least some damage. Almost 50% of the structures with probably what you would classify as major damage. So yeah, it's slow, but we're coming.
Definitely been thinking about y'all, Earl. I know that y'all got hit really hard. Any other steering committee members want to just share kind of how they're doing post Ida? It's been really challenging. Okay. All righty. Well, I think we can go ahead and move into the content portion of today's meeting. Sorry about that. My dog just decided to jump out of that chair. Okay. So we always do this during every single meeting, just as a reminder, and then also because we have folks who join us who maybe this is their first meeting or discussion, or it's been a really long time since they've joined in. So we always try to provide a past meetings recap, reminders, updates section. So some updates on work that's going on. I should have put this one first, but Lindsay Lamanna, who is the main graduate student who had been working with Dr. Thomas Dowsett, she successfully defended her thesis yesterday. So big congrats to her. We're very, very thrilled and excited. Her work was specifically related to the plan analysis and network analysis work that Dr. Dowsett was helping her conduct. And so that was, again, a review of 78 planning documents across the region. They're going to have a report that's put together, and I also hope that they can provide a presentation that's to the benefit of this group. We're getting ready to kind of schedule that as well, but now that her thesis has been successfully defended, that's kind of the next thing that she has to tackle. So we're very thrilled and excited for her. She was also an intern with us last summer, so just really glad to see her do well in that. We are having some visioning sessions taking place in November with the Georgetown Climate Center Resilient Affordable Housing. And so just to note that these visioning sessions, they're meant to be our initial kind of conversation with folks beyond the work group that we have. So the work group, all of that information can be found online under that Region 7 Watershed tab under partnerships. But that group, we worked with them to kind of put together a list of some folks to recommend for a space. We're not meaning to be exclusionary in those conversations. Those resources for this work, those are explicitly provided through Georgetown Climate Center, through philanthropic resources that they have acquired on their own, separate from us, and they made a decision to work with us. So they have resources to have paid facilitators in that space. So we are constrained by the number of paid facilitators that we can have to create what they're referring to as a container for engagement, right? So if you have too many folks, then it's really hard to be able to actually have one-to-one interactions and engagement with individuals in ways that are really meaningful. However, with that being said, Georgetown is also having one-to-one interviews with folks to be able to get feedback prior to the development of that document, because where we're at right now is we have some draft terminology, we have draft goals and objectives, And then later on, once we have a draft document put together, we're going to be having larger sessions to be able to get more feedback prior to making a final document. So if you weren't kind of in that initial visioning session or in the work group, don't worry. We're going to be having more opportunities for discussion in the future. And if you want to hear more about that work now, we can definitely do that. And if you're interested in providing some input, let me know, and I can work with the folks at Georgetown Climate Center to schedule a one-to-one interview. So I think they've talked to quite a few folks, if I'm remembering correctly and looking at this list right. So for the Environmental Finance Center's work, again, we don't pay for any of that work. That is resources that were acquired by the Environmental Finance Centers. And it came to us saying, you know, we have resources, we would like to work with you. So everybody on this regional steering committee should have received an invitation for a workshop taking place in mid-November. So specifically, we were going to do that in person initially. Then Ida happened, had to essentially kind of shift and pivot. We're now doing virtual, but this is kind of part one of 2 workshops that are taking place. So it's specifically focused on local government staffers as well as elected officials. And so that workshop space is across 2 days. We're going to be having conversations. Dr. Barry Kime is also going to be presenting during that workshop, but we're going to be focusing in on BRIC. So we have some folks from FEMA Region 6 as well as GOSEC who are going to be presenting on that. We have folks who are experts in community rating systems, so local LADOTD folks, as well as UNO Chart. They're going to be talking about some resources that are provided and available. We're also going to be learning about a local case study in Gonzales specifically, and about how they successfully had the Silverleaf Project funded through kind of what is a more unusual funding source, if you will. So there will be some peer-to-peer learning opportunities as well. Ultimately, the goal of that conversation is to be able to provide more context around existing grant programs, how to kind of match those to projects, and then also help us better understand what are some capacity or technical assistance areas that we could really focus on during a workshop during the spring. Also with the EPA Resilience Roadmap, we had our first advisory group meeting. Again, those are not resources that we are paying for. EPA had resources and came to us and said they would like to work with us. So we are going to be working on that Resilience Roadmap. Those first 2 activities are really informing what that means. And so it's going to be a structured decision-making process with a group of individuals to essentially kind of help lay out what potential strategies could look like with regards to especially different scenarios in the future over a certain time horizon based on the information that we've gathered so far. I know that's extraordinarily vague, and it's meant to be because we need the activities with Georgetown Climate Center as well as the EFCs to inform what that work looks like. And as a reminder, the Working with Nature training series, that first session is actually tomorrow. So the state has done a really fantastic job in setting up that training series. That's going to be taking place over, I think, basically a few years. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities to tap into that. So if you have any questions about that, I know that we have some folks from the state who can help answer those. Nicolette or Lakeisha or anybody else from the state, do y'all have anything to add about the nature-based solutions training?
Hey, Rachel. So this is just part 1 in a multi-part series, educational series on incorporating nature-based solutions into our designs for mitigation improvements. So tomorrow we'll be hearing from Steve Piku to talk generally about nature-based solutions and what they can do. And then we'll hear a case study from Dr. Ahmad Habib, and it should be very interesting. And we hope that as many of you in Region 7 participate, listen in, and we'll give information about the upcoming training sessions soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicolette. And I think one thing to flag is, as I'm learning more about BRIC, is that a lot of the projects that were awarded this first fiscal year funding amount for BRIC were, really oriented towards nature-based solutions. So we also know that that's competitive at a federal scale for some pretty big funding opportunities. We have our open call for updates. So steering committee members, if you want to come off mute because you have some updates, or anybody else on the call, are there any updates that you would like to share? So opportunities for public meetings that are coming up related to watershed drainage, flooding, learning opportunities through workshops, anything of that nature? Okay. I'm hearing none, but if you think of something afterwards, feel free to send it to me and I can make sure that I get that to the group. Okay, so just as a quick recap, and as a reminder, if you go to crpcla.org, under the Region 7 Watershed tab, under the previous events archive, you can watch every single one of our previous meetings. You can also access all of our meeting minutes there as well. So this is just a very quick and succinct quick recap. So between August and October of 2020, we focused on the vision, values, and goals, root causes of flooding, and opportunities to address those challenges. To the latter part of the year from 2020, we focused on what kind of work the region would like to do. We discussed some initial governance models and got some feedback for a recommendation. In January to March, we adopted a provisional recommendation for governance. We discussed the round one regional project selection process, as well as potential funding resources. And that was that paper that I think Steve Piku, Adaptation Strategies, put together. April to June, we voted on the round one regional project selection process. We discussed the governance recommendation and adopted the governance recommendation. So that was an iteration of the provisional recommendation after we've solicited a lot of feedback from individuals. And then over the summer months, we adopted the recommendation for round one regional project, and also discussed the draft membership ideas that were presented by the transition team during the previous meeting in August. And I will toss it over to Ross and Bridget for a couple of reminder slides.
Yep, just the mission that we kind of developed last year, and just to, convey the message again, is to reduce flood risk, improve floodplain management throughout the state, and maximize the natural and benefit functions of floodplains. So that's the mission, and I'll turn it over to Bridget for the vision.
Okay, Region 7 vision is Region 7 envisions a future with less flood risk, healthier natural environments, and resilience practices that are responsive to the needs of our communities and to our evolving environment.
And if you've been here from the beginning, I always like to speak on one of these from the executive order from Governor John Bel Edwards. And, I think all of them are important, and we should all read these prior to the meeting and as we are developing our path forward. So I'm not going to pick one out today, but what I would stress is that all of the regional steering committee members kind of review this on your own. So we are meeting and we're developing our ideas on how this governance structure will be made, how we will govern ourselves in this region. I think it's important to have these in the back of our mind pretty much, at all times while we're doing this mission.
Thanks, y'all. Okay, and actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because we have Dr. Barry Keim who's with us today. So thank you so much for joining us today. You should have screen sharing privileges, Barry. So if you want to introduce yourself and get started, the floor is yours. Oh, you're muted.
I see that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, greetings, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to see if I can master sharing this screen here. Okay, which screen are you? We're all good?
All good.
Okay, it's a beautiful thing. Okay, can you see my mouse? Can you see my cursor on the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, we're in good shape then. Great. Okay, so my name's Barry Keim. I am the director at LSU of something called the Southern Climate Impacts Planning Program. This is a research program funded by NOAA. I also serve as the Louisiana State climatologist, and I'm a professor at LSU in the Department of Geography and Anthropology. So the title of the talk, Hurricane, Storm Surge, Heavy Rainfall, and Freezes in a Changing Climate. So kind of a, almost all-encompassing extremes, if you will. That's the primary focus of the kinds of research that I do. And I'll primarily focus on hurricanes and storm surge, but I will give you a little smattering of some of the things we're working on over at LSU and my research team with heavy rainfall and freezes as well, and some of the collaborations that we have ongoing. So just to sort of wrap our heads around what's going on with the 2021 hurricane season. Well, this is NOAA's forecast back in August, and they were projecting anywhere from 15 to 21 named storms, of which 7 to 10 would become hurricanes and 3 to 5 would become major hurricanes. Well, up to this point, we've already had 20 named storms. We've already had 7 hurricanes and 4 major hurricanes. So we're kind of on the upper end of the certainly on the named storm side of things, and we're at 7 with hurricanes, 4 major hurricanes. We're already in the middle there. So it's obviously going to be a banner season. It's already tied for the 3rd busiest hurricane season we have on record. The busiest obviously was 2020, and I have a whole series of records that were broken last year. 30 named storms, we had 14 hurricanes, 17 majors. We had the most named storms in a season, beating 2005, which had 28. We had the most storms in the month of September last year with 10. We're breaking the record of 8 from several other years. We have 11 landfalls last year in the United States, 9, breaking the record of 9 from 1916. And of course, as we all know, we had 4 landfalls in Louisiana, tying the state record from 2002. And that doesn't even count Marco, which kind of hung off of our coast, and but they later declared it not a landfall in Louisiana. 27 of the 30 storms had the earliest formation date for that letter in the alphabet, and we had 3 storms form in 6 hours on September the 18th, which is pretty mind-boggling. And we had 5 storms raging at once on September the 14th. So really crazy year. This year is probably not shaping up to be quite as bad, but still, again, we're already tied for the 3rd busiest on record. So already a pretty busy year, but hopefully it won't eclipse what we had last year. So why are hurricanes so important? I mean, I think we all know the answers to this, but one reason is we have a lot of people in harm's way in the coastal zone. And this is, a table, lots of numbers here. I don't want to get lost in the, in all this, but a couple of things I want to highlight. This is the population of the U.S. coastal counties and parishes around the Gulf of Mexico, going back to 1900. So in the year 1900, the total number of people in all the counties, all the way, from Texas all the way around to through Florida, we had less than 1 million people on the coast in those coastal counties and parishes. And notice half of those are in Louisiana, and that includes Orleans Parish, okay? By 1950, less than 1 million jumps up to 3.7 million. By the year 2000, we're up to 12 million. And by 2019, we're over 16 million. So obviously a huge deal in terms of the number of people in harm's way, not to mention all the infrastructure, oil and gas, all the McMansions, especially over along the Florida coast, hotels also mainly along the Florida coast, but and yacht clubs. I mean, the amount of very expensive infrastructure in the coastal zone is pretty mind-boggling. Now, I also highlight the Louisiana data from 2000 to 2019. If you'll notice this, we had 1.6 million in the year 2000, which dropped down to 1.5 million, if you will, in 2019. We are the only state that has lost population along our coastal zone since 2000. And some very obvious reasons, and I'll just throw out a few names: Katrina, Rita, Gustav Ike, Laura, Delta, Zeta, and Ida. Is a lot of the driving force behind that, obviously, and I suspect these numbers may even go down further, since technically we're not even including the Laura, Delta, Zeta, and Ida in these statistics. This is from 2019. So this trend, I'm sure, is likely to continue downward along the coastal zone. Okay, this is what I call my time-space continuum of hurricane strikes in the United States and Mexico. Now, I know this probably looks like a Rorschach chart to you, but it's actually very simple. I love this chart. We created this at LSU, and I want you to love it too. So if you work with me a little bit, I'll try to explain this in as simple a way as possible. I said, it's really not a complicated graphic. we're looking at geography on the x-axis labeled up at the top. So over in the upper left-hand corner, we start off with a series of sites in the Yucatan Peninsula. And we work our way around the Gulf Coast, okay, the Gulf of Mexico coast, clockwise, going from the Yucatan on up the, that Mexican coast until we hit South Padre Island, Texas here. And then we move on into Louisiana, the Panhandle of Florida, down to Key West. And then we go up the East Coast along Florida into the mid-Atlantic eventually and on up into New England. So it's basically, we're taking that coastline from the Yucatan, stretching it out, doing the whole Gulf Coast, taking Florida and then all up the East Coast and just stretching it into one big straight line, okay? And that's what we're looking at across the top of this graphic. And we have site by site, and they're not evenly spaced, but these are specific locations that have some importance, either an important beach community or important economically. And then we go from 1901 all the way through the year 2020 on the y-axis, starting at the top 1901, bottom 2021. Now, anywhere on this chart where you see a little green dot, that represents a tropical storm strike. Anywhere you see a yellow dash or dot, you're looking at a category 1 or 2 hurricane strike. And anywhere you see a red dot or dash, if you will, that is a category 3, 4, or 5 hurricane strike, and or a major hurricane strike. Now note that a hurricane or a single storm can create many strikes depending on where it hits, how it moves along the coast. And like some of these lines that you see on the far right-hand side of the graphic over here going up the East Coast. I mean, some of these storms are just storms that are just marching up the East Coast, making strike after strike after strike at these various locations. Okay, so having said all that, the thing I want to draw your attention to is this big clustering of events that you see back in here. This is in this starts in the mid-20s, the late 20s, I should say, starting in the mid-20s, through the 30s and 40s. 40s were just crazy. And the geographical breadth here is South Florida, okay? Including Miami, the Keys, Sanibel Island, all the way, really all the way up to Tampa, St. Petersburg. Then in the 50s, the 1950s, the center of gravity shifts over here into the Carolinas. It was still a very active decade, but the circulation changed and the storm tracking changed. And as a result, the Carolinas were getting hammered. In the early 60s, we're back to South Florida. And then for about the next 30 or so years, we go into a relative period of calm in terms of the whole basin. And then starting around 1995, you can see we kind of start getting active in the north central Gulf Coast, Florida Panhandle in particular, and over here in the Carolinas. And you can very clearly see 2004 and 2005 with all the major hurricane activity, especially in South Florida and along the north central Gulf Coast, including Louisiana. And of course, if you look at the time series over here for Louisiana, this sort of active period, quiet, and inactive again doesn't appear quite as distinct. So for the Louisiana, these periodicities don't seem as prominent, but over the whole basin, definitely way more active from the 20s to the 60s, relatively quiet from the 60s to the mid 90s. And we've been active since the mid 1990s. So what is driving these patterns? That's the million-dollar question. Well, I mean, I would argue the main thing going on is something we call the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. What the AMO is just a very fancy way of indexing the sea surface temperatures in the North Atlantic basin. And so that very active period that started in the mid-20s, well, that starts right here on this graphic, okay, right here. And the mid-60s is about right here. So from the mid-20s to the mid-60s, sea surface temperatures primarily running above normal. Then starting around 1965 or so, sea surface temperatures cool off, and it stays relatively cool till about 1995. So, and we didn't have nearly the hurricane activity across the whole basin and way fewer strikes, if you will, in the United States. And then since 1995, for whatever reason, and we don't really fully understand what's driving these changes, but the switch flicked back in the other direction. Sea surface temperatures running warmer than normal again in the North Atlantic basin. And we're having hyperactive activity. In fact, since 1995, virtually every year has had hyperactive activity with the exception, I believe, of 2 El Nino years. So, if you're in the hurricane forecasting business, it's almost a no-brainer to predict an above normal season until this switch flicks back into the cold direction, because every year virtually is going to have hyperactivity unless it's an El Nino, and then it's anybody's guess. So using those data, and this is from an earlier iteration of that graphic, but we took those data and we put together return frequencies of all tropical systems and hurricanes across the Gulf and East Coast. The inner swath that you see on here gives the return frequency in years for all tropical storms and hurricanes combined. So if you look at the 3 sites we have in Louisiana, about any given location can expect to experience at least tropical storm force winds once every 3 years. And if you look around the Gulf Coast, it's about once every 3 to 4 years. It actually drops down to once every 5 years down here in South Texas. But it's about once every 3 years also in South Florida. But notice over here off the Outer Banks of North Carolina, it's about once every 2 years. That's the most active spot on our coastline for tropical activity. Now, when you look at hurricanes for Louisiana, so this is subtracting out all the tropical storms. So for Louisiana, return frequencies for hurricanes would be 7 years over here in Plaquemines Parish, 10 here at Morgan City, and 15 over here in Cameron Parish. But if you look around the Gulf Coast, it's about once every 8 to 10 years, along the north central Gulf Coast, drops off a little bit down here in South Florida. It's about once every 4 to 5 years down here in South Florida, and about once every 5 to 8 years over here in the Outer Banks of Carolina. Those are the active spots. Then the outer swath gives us the return frequencies of all major hurricanes. And for Louisiana, we're looking at 26, 26, 52. Keep in mind, a single storm can really change these numbers pretty dramatically. But what I find, and by the way, major hurricane activity about once every 13 to 15 years down here in South Florida. But what I find really interesting, and I was shocked when we put this graphic together, what we found was the areas that don't get hit very often. Notice the area of the Big Bend area of Florida. 13 would be Apalachicola, all the way down here to St. Petersburg and Tampa. I mean, these sites, 105 plus. 105 means they had 1 hurricane strike in 105 years we analyzed. 105 plus means there were 0 major hurricane strikes at that location in the 105 years that we analyzed. Now, having said that, our data set here ended in 2005. Obviously, since we put this graphic together, Hurricane Michael has come through and sort of annihilated Apalachicola and points eastward. But still, it doesn't change the numbers very much. We're talking about 1 storm. So, and also notice starting from site 23 over here in Florida, that's Cocoa Beach, Florida, going up the Florida coast all the way through Georgia, 105 pluses, 105 plus, 105, 105 plus, and so on. That area hardly ever gets hit by major hurricane activity, which I also found kind of surprising. And of course, it has a lot to do with the shape of the coast in here and how the storm tracks, the preferred storm tracks, venture into this particular region. But if I'm a hotel developer and major storm surge is the biggest problem in terms of damage, well, it makes a whole lot more sense to go build in Jacksonville than it does down at South Beach. Now, surge obviously is the big deal in terms of causing loss of life and damage. Obviously, we've seen what wind can do in Lake Charles in 2020, but surge still causes at least half the fatalities involved with hurricanes. And going back historically, that ratio was even higher. In fact, in the older storms, about 90% of the deaths were due to storm surge. So I compare and contrast these 2 storms, Galveston hurricane of 1900 with Hurricane Ike in 2008. These are 2 storms separated by incredible advances in meteorological forecasting, understanding of hurricanes. And of course, back in Galveston, the storm rolled in unannounced. The people were totally unprepared when it got there. The 15.5-foot storm surge overwhelmed this island, destroyed virtually every structure, and there were anywhere from say 6,000 to 8,000 drownings, 6,000 to 8,000 deaths that happened in this event. Hurricane Ike, over 100 years later, this is the Bolivar Peninsula, just to the east of Galveston, probably maybe 10 miles away at most. And you can see the amount of damage that took place here. We can't get the infrastructure out of the way. We did get the people out of the way. The number of people killed in Hurricane Ike is obviously if you're the one, one or one of your family members killed, it's a big deal, but the numbers are way smaller in Ike, probably, in double digits rather than, looking at thousands of people, maybe even up to 10,000 people in Galveston. So we can get the people out of the way now, but we can't get the infrastructure out of the way. So since surge is such a prominent feature of these hurricanes, and we know, and there's already a database called HURDAT, HURDAT, HURDAT for hurricane data, we decided to make a sort of a counterpart, if you will, called SurgeDat for surge data. And it's the world's most comprehensive storm surge database. We developed this at LSU. This is sort of a joint venture between us and the University of Oklahoma on our SCIP project, the Southern Climate Impacts Planning Program. And with it, we basically built a database back to 1880 and put in as much, we wanted to serve as the clearinghouse, if you will, for all surge data. So here's an example of some of the things you can do in our database. You can actually query a storm, a particular storm. This is Hurricane Ike in 2008. And every one of these little dots on here represents a surge value for Ike in our database. And they're all geo-referenced and geo-coded, and you can look any of these up. And just with the click of a mouse, you can just go up in there and point and click on there, and it'll pull up what the surge, either the surge or storm tide value was, the maximum value that was reached at that specific location. And you can do some pretty interesting things with that. Now we can also do a search by location. In this case, I just clicked down, near Bay St. Louis, and here, the way this algorithm works is you can set a radius. In this case, I set it at 20 miles from the central point where I clicked, and it pulls up it'll pull up a single surge value for every hurricane that has a surge value inside of that circle. So some storms like, Katrina and Camille or whatever, we can have lots of data in here, but we're only going to pull up the single biggest surge that falls within that circle for each hurricane. And then, underneath, this thing will build the full surge history for that location. And then over here on the right, this, just on the fly, this query will generate return frequencies, 10-year out to 100-year. So for this circle right here, 100-year return frequency storm surge is 25.81 feet. So 25.8 feet, 50-year surge is about 20.4 feet, and so on down the line. We also have what's called a return periods predictor. If you're going to build the structure at 10 feet above sea level, well, you can migrate up this curve and find out just how often you can expect that to flood in terms of the return frequency on average. We have a full time series of the surges, the years they occurred and how high they were, and then we have a ranking of the surges located underneath. So you can query these data in a number of ways. Some of the interesting things we've been able to do with this, well, prior to building this database, I could have told you the top 2 surges in the Gulf, Katrina and Camille, but after that, I couldn't have told you what was 3 through 10. Well, here you have it. Katrina and Camille come in 1-2 as expected, both at the same location, not an accident, I might add. Bless you, Rachel, by the way. And so we have basically a 28 and 25 foot surge at Pass Christian. And what happens over in that neck of the woods is, given how the Delta, Southeast Louisiana and Plaquemines Parish, and then the levees on the Mississippi River basically block the water on a southeast wind, and it gets trapped, between Louisiana and Mississippi, and then it gets sort of refunneled, if you will, in a secondary way up toward Bay St. Louis. So the potential and we got really shallow water there, which also helps to exacerbate the surges. So this 28-foot surge is the largest or highest surge measured in the Western Hemisphere that we have a record of since 1880. But then you can also see Laura in 2020, much to our surprise, came in with a 20.9-foot surge at Rutherford Beach. That's the 4th biggest ever in the Gulf and the largest in Louisiana. And of course, if you come down, we got Rita back in 2005 at 17.8 feet is the is in the top 10. It's 9th. Now, another interesting thing. Okay, these data go back to 1880, and these are the top 10 surges we know of in the Gulf of Mexico. Katrina, 2005, Laura, 2020, Michael, 2018, Rita, 2005, Ike, 2008. Half the storms in our top 10 have been produced since 2005. And keep in mind, the data go back to 1880. So what in the world is going on there? And I don't have a good answer for you there. I will say if there were other surges that were in this realm, I think we would have a pretty good record of them. And so I think there's something to this. I don't think this is a recency bias. Now, I know our data has a recency bias. In fact, if I just step back, if you just look at the surges in this circle right here, in this time series, you can see this clustering of events, but these are in the 5 to 10 foot range where we have the big clustering. The big ones are all in there, okay? So I feel pretty good that that maybe there's something going on here. And I don't know, I'll just leave it there, but I do point that out, that 5 of the top 10 have occurred since 2005 in the Gulf of Mexico, 5 biggest. These are the top surges just in Louisiana. We were able to sort of drill down just on the state. Now, I haven't updated this since Laura, but Laura would be number 1 at 20.9. The biggest surge event from Katrina in Louisiana was 18.7 feet. A little bit bigger than Rita at 17.8. Now I remember during these events, dealing with Governor Blanco, I was initially unimpressed with how things were handled during that event, not knowing just how extreme these 2 events were. But at the time, if you think about this, I have a whole new respect for what everybody had on their hands back in 2005. We had the 2 biggest surges on record that have ever occurred in the state of Louisiana occur within 4 weeks of each other. And again, these records go back to 1880. So obviously what transpired in 05 was, obviously we knew it was a big deal, but after putting it in this perspective, it really helped frame this up as to, what state government and parish government had on their hands to cope with after those 2 events. We've also looked at we've taken our database globally, and we wanted to basically size up how big Gulf surges were with other basins in the world. So here's an example where we built a global peak surge data set as part of our SurgeDat database. And what we found is that our surges are comparable with Australia in terms of the frequency and magnitude, about the same. But what goes on in the Bay of Bengal is beyond the pale. And in fact, the top 12 surges in the Bay of Bengal, the credible surges that we've been able to find, the highest surge was 44.9 feet in 1876 in Bangladesh. So try to wrap your head around that for a second. And that's like I said, that's the biggest surge. And we have a couple of 40 footers in India as well. So again, our biggest surge in the Gulf, 28 feet, that's the biggest in the Western Hemisphere, but pales in comparison to what can potentially happen in the Bay of Bengal and what has happened. I just put this in here. This is from the Washington Post, the Capital Weather Gang. This is, when Hurricane Laura occurred. Obviously, they knew it was a big deal. They have it announced as a 17-foot surge, but that was 17 feet above the ground where they measured it. Of course, the ground was about 4 or so feet above sea level, so it ended up being a 20.9 foot storm surge. I just have some pictures in here just highlighting some of the damage that occurred in recent events. This is, I have a lot of Katrina pictures in here. This is St. Bernard Parish, where I grew up in Katrina. I grew up literally about 2 blocks off the left edge of this photograph. This feature you see right here, that is Andrew Jackson High School. My wife went to that high school. This is the St. Bernard Cultural Center, which I know there's a lot of jokes about, but hey, I'm a proud Chalmatian, no problem. But you can see, all you're seeing for the most part are the rooftops of the houses across this entire community. This house here, the 2-story with the dormers, that's the house I grew up in as a kid. The neighbors took this picture here, and basically what you're seeing, the peak of the roof of the framing around the front door, poking out of the floodwaters here. The whole first floor of our house was underwater. All of our neighbors' single-story houses were just the rooftops poking out. This is the house after we gutted the place to start the cleanup. It was just a disaster, needless to say. Got the Kaiser smokestack looming in the background. Again, the people who took that picture of my house in the flood, the one who wrote it out, They said the water came up in that region. There was no water on the ground, and 30 minutes later, there was 10 feet of water. So that's how fast that water came up. And when that happens, crazy things like this happen. This is a house in St. Bernard Parish. This is in the town of Miro, where, you know, again, the water, you can see water lines on the roof of the house, by the way. But the water came up so fast, like as noted at, you know, with the half an hour up to 10 feet, the water didn't have time to penetrate into the house. And this house was not on concrete pillars. And the concrete foundation actually became buoyant and popped up and floated down the street. So this is deposited in the middle of the street, along with you know, a van and all sorts of other debris. This is the lower Ninth Ward, similar kind of thing, basically in the same polder. Water levels here were probably 14 feet above mean sea level, and the land here is probably about 4 to 5 feet below. So, you know, we're looking at you know, 18, 19, or 20 feet of standing water on the ground in some of these locations here, in particular, right at this location. This is the infamous barge that basically got sucked out of the industrial canal. This is the industrial canal levee wall here that you see in the foreground. The breach was just to the left of the image, and of course, you know, there was some thinking that this barge may have banged its way through that levee, but the forensic evidence didn't support it. And this thing probably just basically got sucked out of the canal and deposited into this neighborhood. Now, one of the things I want you to notice, this picture was taken about 2 weeks after Katrina by one of my friends, Patrick Hess, who was doing some work for FEMA. And I want you to notice the proximity of the barge and the bus. Okay, we have some tens of feet that separate this little mini bus. Okay. Now I went out there, so this is taken 2 weeks after Katrina. I went out there about 4 weeks after this picture was taken, and I snapped this picture. And so I want you to ponder what in the world you think happened there. And of course, most of you savvy folks who know hurricanes know that Hurricane Rita made landfall 4 weeks later. And what nobody ever talks about is how much flooding occurred in New Orleans because of Hurricane Rita, because, you know, most people hadn't even gone back to see their houses yet post Katrina. So obviously, to resuspend this barge and float it over and sit it down on top of this minibus, there must have been one hell of a flood that transpired across this region with all those flood walls down. But that's a flood that I have not heard very many people ever even mention. So I find that very curious. Here's just some more stuff for the highlight reel. You know, cars bobbing around like corks with, you know, the engine waiting, the front of the cars down, the trunks of the air pocket. And wherever the car was when the water receded, that's where they got left behind. And this one just happened to be leaning up against the house. I've seen many cars hung up on fences and all sorts of crazy things. This is some Hurricane Laura damage over in Lake Charles. I went over there with a couple of my graduate students like 2 or 3 days after the storm made landfall. And so what we saw was this picture on the left 2 or 3 days after. I went some months later. They boarded up this Capital One building, which is one of the prominent buildings of Lake Charles. And they're boarding it up, but I tell you, it doesn't look like there's anything overly productive going on over there, even as recently as about a month ago. Lake Charles is still, you know, still on its knees from this event. It's pretty grim. And anyway, this is just sort of symbolic of what's not going on over there. This is just some other photos around, in and around Lake Charles that we saw, you know, in the days after the event. I mean, it's just like, you know, every time we turn down a street, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe what we're seeing here. I mean, it was just went on and on. This is a little church called St. Paul's Lutheran Church, right off the Beltway, kind of on the, you know, in the southern part of Lake Charles, but both walls blown out in this case. This is the National Weather Service radar tower. Normally we have a big bulb on the top of this. Obviously that was all damaged. Here's blue roofs across Lake Charles. Still a lot of those around. A lot of those are prominent now in Jefferson Parish following Ida too. So we're back to having all these blue roof communities. So that's a little background. I just wanted to present some of the research we have ongoing with hurricanes. I also wanted to make some mention of some of the rainfall work that we've done and are doing. This is some stuff. This is a project we completed about 2 years ago, working on something called probable maximum precipitation, which I assume some of you probably know a little bit about. We work with a consulting agency called Applied Weather Associates, or AWA. And what probable maximum precipitation is this theoretical upper capacity of the atmosphere to produce rainfall. So bottom line is, if we brought every worst case variable together to produce the mother of all rainfalls, how big would that rainfall be? And in most cases, the event has never occurred, but there should be an example here or there. Hurricane Harvey is the one example. There should be an example here or there that gives us some insight for what could possibly happen at surrounding locations, okay? So what this is showing here is what we put together for a 10 square mile, 72-hour rainfall. We're working on a 4-state study. It was Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. And as you can see across South Louisiana, which I know a lot of you guys have, quite a bit of interest in, I mean, this area in this sort of magenta color, we're talking, between 45 and 50 inches of rain over 3 days over a 10 square mile area. Now, of course, the study we did it basically covers area sizes from less than a square mile out to 20 or 50,000 square miles, and we also do durations from an hour all the way out to 120 hours or 5 days. So if any of this kind of information and what you think the potential worst case variable rainfall would be, this atlas would be the one to go and view. The previous version of this was called Hydrometeorological Report 51, or HMR 51 for short, which was, I think, produced in 1978. So it was getting a little dated, and there were a lot of storms that needed sort of to be brought into the database to reassess. Some of the other work I've done with Applied Weather Associates, we've done a lot of work on Hurricane Harvey for a whole variety of reasons, some for publication, some for other applications. This is one example where we analyzed many hundreds of rain gauges across the region to try to assess how much rain fell across this region, and to assess the flood and just what transpired and how. And this is from Hurricane Harvey. It's a depth area duration table, a bazillion numbers in here. I don't want to get mired in the numbers, okay? But I want to highlight a couple of things. For starters, the thing goes from 1 hour out to 120 hours, and we look at area sizes of a fraction of a square mile all the way out to over 100,000 square miles. And two numbers I want to draw your attention to: 35,000 square miles at 120 hours. We had 22.5 inches of rain. That corresponds to an area size larger than the state of South Carolina. So think about taking 22.5 inches, dropping it over South Carolina in 5 days, and what would happen? Well, that's what happened in southeastern Texas in this event. Now, I know we're going down in size down to 2,000 square miles, but believe it or not, that's about the size of the state of Delaware, okay? The state of Delaware over 5 days, an area the size of Delaware, had 42 inches of rain. So again, think about dropping 42 inches on Delaware in 5 days and imagine what would transpire. Again, this is what happened in Hurricane Harvey. So these are measured numbers, and it's pretty insane. And we're working on trying to determine whether this is the biggest volume of water ever put on the ground in the United States in a single rainfall event. And we're pretty confident that it is, based on what we're seeing. But we're trying to actually document it and get that published. Now, here's some work we also did with Applied Weather Associates, looking at the rains in our event, in the August 2016 event. You can see these two bullseyes, one centered over here just north and east of Baton Rouge, with numbers over 30 inches, 31 1/3 at Watson, Louisiana was the highest measured. We also have a secondary bullseye over here just south of Lafayette, but two pretty major zones here that had substantive rainfall. And we did some work with Dietmar on the Amite River Basin. Bob Jacobson was involved in some of this as well. And this is some of the stuff that we've done with it. So we have the Amite River Basin outlined here. You can see, this is I-12 and I-10 for orientation purposes. But all of this area that you see in this red color here and up north, sort of straddling over the Mississippi-Louisiana boundary, those red areas all experienced a 1,000-year event or greater in that particular rainfall event. We have a 5-day period represented here. But excuse me, well, this is a 72-hour duration. I'm sorry, a 72-hour duration. So we had a 1,000-year event. Most of this fell within a 48-hour period, though. And I guess some other things, just a couple of other little studies. I just wanted to show you some of the things that we've been working on. This is one of my PhD students, Vinnie Brown, looked at how intensity of rain and duration of storms has changed over time. And we looked at about 50 sites that had really high quality hourly data across the Southeast. And what we found in this study, we have a couple of published papers on this if y'all are interested, but what we found was that storms are getting more intense over time. So in those 1 hour, 2 hour dumps of rain, there's a propensity for more rain to be produced in these hourly blocks than what we've seen, say 50 or 60 or 70 years ago. And it is in every site that you see here with an upward arrow, upward green arrow, means we had a significantly increasing trend in rainfall intensity, across these locations. Underneath, all these downward arrows are telling us that storm duration is decreasing. And the way we defined a storm was contiguous hours of rain. Once we had a dry hour in between an event, we decided that when the rain started up again, we started a new event. But what we're finding is that the duration is getting shorter with time and more rainfall is being produced in those hours. So again, we got a couple of papers on that. And this is just the last one I'll show you here. This is some work I've done with the National Wetland Center over in Lafayette, looking at impacts of warming winters on coastal ecology. And I was brought in as the climatologist to try to ascertain, well, what is indeed going on with the climate, especially across what they were determining or calling the temperate zone, so the southern tier of the United States. So we looked at San Francisco, Tucson, Arizona, New Orleans, and Tampa. And what we found is that in 3 of these 4 sites, this upper green line, if you will, is the depiction of how winter temperatures are changing. 3 of those 4 sites had significantly increasing winter temperatures. Then the blue line that you see here represents the single coldest temperature measured each winter season. And as you can see, that single extreme cold event is getting milder with time, and that occurred at 3 of the 4 sites. And then if you look at the bottom graphic, the bar chart, that's showing the number of days above freeze, or excuse me, number of days below freezing, the number of freeze days in the record. Look at San Francisco. This is mind-blowing to me. Since the year 2000, San Francisco has had 1 freeze event at the airport location. 1 freeze event since 2000. And if you go back, into the 50s, I mean, we had 1 year that had, I believe this was 17 freeze days in a single season. And they've only had 1 in over 20 years, which is, pretty crazy to me. So, and you can see some, Tucson's got a significantly declining trend. New Orleans, for example, if you look at the last sort of 30-year benchmark period, we normally use 30-year averages. There's over twice as many. In fact, there may be even almost 3 times as many freeze events in the 30 years prior, relative to the most recent 30 years. And we're seeing, a similar kind of pattern over here in Tampa. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop speaking. And I don't know if we have time for questions, or Rachel, where you want to go with this, but I'll let you steer from here. And Rachel, I can't hear you.
There we go. Thank you so much, Dr. Keim. I was getting lost in some of my interest in meteorology and things, and I was like, oh, let me have a whole list of things to look up, but it is not about me in this time. So I think what we can do is we can take time for 2 questions. And I know, Dr. Keim, people would really like to see the slides, so I'm going to connect with you, get those afterwards. Somebody had also requested the published work on hourly rainfall intensity. So the up and down arrows graphic in particular, I think, was what was coming up during then. But we'll take 2 questions, and then I think we'll move on to the next. But just thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
Rachel, I just wanted to, thank Dr. Keim. I mean, that was awesome. I really enjoyed it. I can listen to stuff like that all day. So again, just appreciate, you taking the time and presenting to us. And again, it was great. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Is there any objection?
What questions do we have, folks? Go ahead, Ruth.
Sorry, I just want to know, is there any objection to sharing this part of the presentation with our council members and things like that? It was really, really informative, and I really think that they would get a lot of value out of it.
Oh, no problem. I'll send it to Rachel and Rachel can send it out if that'll work.
That'd be great.
Okay. And just to follow up, I also have a published paper on the 2016 flood, if anybody's interested in seeing that. I can send a couple of the papers to Rachel and I also have a published paper on those return frequencies of hurricanes as well. So some of the things I talked about in this talk, I'll send you the published work that accompanies it.
And I see John Clark, you're off mute. Did you have
Hello.
a question? It's hard to hear you.
Yeah.
Hey, there we are.
Dr. Klein, thank you very much. That was very, very informative. I have a different question. Not only just increased rainfall in certain areas of Louisiana, but the inverse. Are you seeing like areas of Louisiana that may have less rainfall, such as Northeast Louisiana?
That is a really good question. I mean, there's a lot of variability in the rainfall totals. For the longest time, we were seeing increases in rain over, say, the last 100 years all across Louisiana. But the last 15 or 20 years, it's been pretty bumpy. We've had a lot of really wet years combined with a lot of really dry years. 99 and 2000 were really dry years across most of the state. 2011 was brutally hot and dry, especially across the northern tier of Louisiana. So it's been kind of all over the place, but I don't think there's any real discernible trend in there that we can pull out. But we have had certainly some extreme years going in both directions.
Rachel, I have a question, if I may.
Absolutely.
So I also want to thank you, Dr. Keim. I'm an environmental lawyer. I'm not a climatologist. I'm not, like most of the folks here, on the front lines in parishes dealing with infrastructure and property damage and flood control. But my understanding of the 2018, executive order of Governor Edwards that created the Watershed Initiative was that the 2016 torrential rains were of such magnitude and such a, I'll just say a non-professional term, game changer in terms of damage and consequences, that it by itself required this new approach in Louisiana to managing floodplains and flood control systems, dividing the state into watersheds in different regions. I'm curious from your perspective, is there such a difference between non-hurricane rainfall events and hurricane rainfall events that warrants this kind of approach that we're involved with? Or was it just a matter of time before rain from both hurricanes and non-hurricanes became so consequential that it was appropriate for this kind of a structure and this kind of an initiative to be taken?
Well, I don't know all the ins and outs of the politics of the decisions, but what I can speak to is the kinds of big rains that we get across this region. We probably get more catastrophic rains from fronts than we do from tropical events, just because we get so many more fronts moving through the area. They don't all produce catastrophic rains, but sometimes they stall out. And if the conditions are just right, we've had some crazy spring events in particular, April, early May. There's some squirrely things that happen in May that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. Some weird atmospheric configurations that we don't see at any other time of the year. And we get some crazy big rains, similar to what Lake Charles had 17 inches in a few hours. That was a non-tropical event. And then, of course, the 2016 event is another hybrid-esque type of event where I would call it a tropical wave. It was really what I would call a precursor to a hurricane. We get about 100 tropical waves that spin up every year. And fortunately, only about 10 or 20% of them turn into a named storm. But what hit us in August of 2016 was one of these precursors to a hurricane. I would call it a tropical wave. It did get a little bit of frontal support But I would argue that, you know, it was a tropical wave that parked over Louisiana and tapped into some of the highest humidity, what we would call in the meteorological world, the precipitable water in the atmosphere was at an all-time high. And that little mechanism, seemingly innocuous on a weather map, tapped into that high level of moisture and just, you know, rained like crazy on us. So I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like that in the historical record. So that was a really unusual kind of event. But, you know, then to follow that up, then we have Hurricane Harvey comes and produces 60 inches of rain in 5 days at a couple of locations. And then we throw in Imelda after that, which produced 45 inches in almost, you know, some of the, you know, similar locations. We've had a real unusual rash of crazy big events. Most of them have been tropical recently, but going back, you know, like the 1983 flood across the, you know, all across the Florida parishes, that was a frontal event that happened in April. But of course, these tropical events, I think, have the potential to ultimately bring more moisture because there's more precipitable moisture in the atmosphere at that time and entrained in those systems than what we see in those frontal events. But those frontal events can be a real nuisance and drop, you know, 10, 15 inches of rain pretty easily.
Thank you very much. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah. And thanks y'all for the questions and for the time. And Dr. Khan, we might, if there's time and desire, ask you to come back. I think a lot of folks have a lot of remaining questions. And I think that there's probably layers and layers of research and depth to your work that folks would probably really love to hear about. So we, again, just thank you so much, Dr. Khan, for your time today. This, I think, was a really great opportunity for folks to learn a little bit more. And I'll follow up with you to get additional resources and materials for the group. So yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been great.
Thank you, Dr. Keim. And now we're gonna actually transition over to the museum team. So thank y'all for giving us some extra time for questions. So I'm not sure if Dr. Naselli or Dr. Habib or let me see who else might be on, but you should have screen sharing privileges.
Yeah, good afternoon. We're both here actually.
Perfect. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel and the group. So Rachel, do you want us, we prepared a much shorter set of slides, maybe 7 or 8 or no more than 10. Maybe we can go through this quickly and then see if the group has questions. Does that?
I think that's perfect.
That's good. Okay. So I'll talk to some key issues, key ideas with the museum, and then Ehab will also share some of the other pieces of the work. So let me share the screen here. And my apology if my connection is not the best today somehow. Can you all see my screen?
Looks good.
Okay. Okay. So just a very quick reminder about the objectives of the LWI models. You know, I know many of you already may know this information, but just kind of a refresher, and also to kind of get you thinking about, you know, what the models will be used for as part of the model use, maintenance, and storage museum plan, right? So, and this is from the modeling guidance document that you may have seen along the museum distribution. That's what the consultants are being told to build their models to meet these objectives. So the program defined primary objectives that the models should serve when they are done, when they are finished. And basically here you can see those bullets here. It's to support mitigation feasibility studies for flood mitigation projects, looking at things like consequence and risk assessment, and management of developments and community growth, and of course, support evaluation of proposed projects and watershed management strategies, and also policy development at the watershed scale and probably also at the statewide scale. So this is what we expect the models to do once they are finished and delivered by the consultants. The consultants here, the 7 teams that are in charge of the entire state. The program also, we worked with the consultants to define what we call added value objectives. that basically we expect the model to support, maybe not immediately, but in the future. So basically the models will be the foundation for more developments in the future to support these types of application. So we would want the models in the future with a little bit of enhancement to be able to assess impacts on water quality and habitats, habitat stability, ecological consequences. Maybe they can be used for updating the flood insurance rate maps and also flood warning and flood forecasting systems. So some models may be ready to do some of that. Some models will have the foundation that somebody can take them and build on them in the future and add this feature. But the foundation should be there to allow these things to happen. We also, this slide here communicate what kind of specific projects the models can be used to evaluate. Here we list two types of applications. One is a regional types of applications, and the other one is a local application. So examples of regional applications will look things like this: river diversions, levees, large-scale detention ponds, maybe crossings across major highways and interstates, large-scale developments along major rivers. And the models, even though they are regional models, we expect, or they should be able to handle some local scale projects that have regional impacts or impacts beyond the immediate location. So for example, mid-sized detention ponds, channel widening, maybe roadways and culverts, again, as long as the scale is supported in the model. We don't expect the models to be able to handle small detention, small kind of neighborhood type analysis. That's beyond the scale of the resolution of the model. So you know, how the question that we're trying to address through this museum plan or museum study is to see how the models can be used by all relevant stakeholders and how to also ensure that these models will continue to live and continue to be updated and continue to be used. So we define a model life cycle that starts from the development of the models, which the items are in blue here. And that's basically what the consultants, the LWI consultants, are doing as we speak. They are building those models. Once the models are built, they can be used for, like I said, project evaluation and all these applications. So that's something that can be done by any user, right? And then these green items here is basically what the museum plan covers, really. And it starts from the models are done and finished and available for use. They will be stored or housed in a repository, an online system, a web-based system that allows folks to, starting from the first item, is to discover which models exist for the regions, to browsing and searching based on location. Once they find the model that they're interested in, they can download it, which we call a checkout. And the user can stop here if they don't plan to do anything with the model modifications. But if the user modifies the model for whatever reason, that could be that they wanted to improve the model, they wanted to add some feature that was built into their watershed, then they will modify the model and they will submit a notification to the system, to the museum system, to say, okay, I made this change or modification, and then they will check it back into the system. Somebody will have to, again, through the museum system, will have to review these modifications and make sure they were done properly with the right modeling procedure and check and reviews and so forth, and approve that modification. Maybe there are multiple folks who are working on the same model based on their projects, maybe a developer or a project in this city and another project in a neighboring city, and they're both working with the same watershed. They will both be working independently, but the museum system will kind of connect them and make sure that the respective changes are coordinated. Maybe they need to work together to capture the changes in their different jurisdictions. So that's what the museum system should support that cycle of model discovery, model use, model modifications, and review and approval and updates to the models. And I'll show you here very quickly 2 examples from other states that the museum system for the LWI may look like it. We hope that it will have more features, but I guess this is just a starting point. And when we talked with those other states, we learned so much from what they have done. And we got feedback from them on where they want their systems to go, or what they could have done to make it better. So we are trying to learn from the other states. So I'll share here another screen where I'm going to show you a very quick kind of not really demo, but just give you a feeling of what that's. So this is a system from San Antonio River Authority, right? So they also invested in building models, and they finished them and they put them on a museum system, I guess, one way or another, if you can call it that way. And again, I'm not going to go through the whole details, but the idea here is that you can go and select an area of interest. Let's say I'm interested in this stream here. So I can come and click on it, and now I can download the model for that data. It highlighted me those 2 streams, and I can download it. I'm not going to download it for that just because of sometimes it's heavy. I can also create a study. This way the system knows that I downloaded that and I'm actually having a study with it, meaning I'm making a development or I'm making a change to the model or what have you. And then they also have something called a dashboard where you can go, this is my dashboard. I create an account there. These are the streams or the watersheds I'm interested in. If I submit a study or not, and I'm working on a study, they have to track it and manage. So there's this kind of functionality. Again, it does not have all the features that we want, but it just gives you an example of what that museum system will look like. They use these models for things like LOMAR and for actual applications that the region goes through. Another one is from Harris County. You're probably familiar with that, but again, that's another system. They call it M3. Again, this is Harris County, and you can go and click on. Sorry, sometimes the internet. Click on their watershed here, and you can download the data. That will give you all the models that come with it. So that system supports discovery and supports download. And then they have here things like you can review submittal checklists. So once you change the model, you submit it back to the system, and somebody will have to review it. And like I said, if there are multiple users of the same model, the system coordinates between them and informs them that, hey, so-and-so is also working on the same region and the same watershed that you're working on. Maybe you guys should coordinate. Or if they don't coordinate, when they both come back to the system, somebody has to integrate the models into the main system. So these are 2 examples of other states. Again, it does not have everything every functionality, but at least it gives you an idea about what do we mean really by the museum system. The museum system is not a place where you can actually run scenarios and do analysis. That's done somewhere else. It's either done when you download the model or through some other systems that the LWI is developing, something like the flood-related website that AACOM and others are working on. That will allow people to interact with the outputs of the models and visualize things. But the museum is more of a model management. Access to the models, downloading them, using them, and bringing them back to the system with the updates that you did. So that's what we're trying to build or figure out how that can be built for LWI and where it's going to be sitting on the cloud, and then maybe then who is going to be managing the different pieces, whether it's the model updates, the model maintenance, the uploads, and all that stuff. So so that brings us to this model museum, which is model use, storage, and maintenance. And based on what you have seen from the 2 examples, any museum system will be composed of 2 components. One deals with the infrastructure, right? The IT, basically the website and the web interface. It's a lot more complicated than a website because it allows you to download stuff and keep track of versions and reviews and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's an IT. And then you have the H&H maintenance, the model maintenance, the model updates, the model checkout, the use, the revisions, the reviews, and then the model check-in back. So both of these components can be done in a central location. The state could be in charge of both components. or they can also be done regionally. A region would say, I would like to host my own models, and I also would like to be in charge of maintaining them. That doesn't mean that other users don't have access to it. It's just that the region becomes in charge of maintaining either component. Same thing, the state can come and say, I'm going to be in charge of these things for all the regions. That doesn't mean that the regions will not have access. The idea is who is responsible, who is in charge, who is better prepared to do either component. So that's what we're trying to evaluate with this museum plan. And like I said, where the H&H maintenance is implemented and where the IT infrastructure is deployed and managed. And the museum document that you have seen lays out different options for doing these things, whether completely central, completely regional, or some sort of a hybrid approach. And I think that's when I will turn it to Dr. Mousahi to walk us through the rest of the slides, and maybe we can take questions after that.
Thank you, Imad. Can you everybody hear me okay with the audio?
Yes.
Okay. So just to follow up on what Imad mentioned in terms of the various approaches to execute and implement the museum plan, as he mentioned, there are approaches that can rely heavily or be labeled as central approaches, or there is regional approaches or somewhere in between, a blended approach. And there is also another approach that is called federated approach. So these are different styles of implementation. And I want to share first some of the common features, and then I will provide some more details about how the differentiation between these different approaches. We want to emphasize that regardless of which approach gets implemented, all the stakeholders will always have access. So who can have access? That is common among all of them, because that's a very important objectives of LWI in general, that all affiliated entities, whether that's federal agencies, state, regional, local, private firms, everybody will have access regardless of which approach gets implemented. In terms of also consistency among all the regions, that also is an important characteristics of the system, and we want to make sure that that also gets respected and implemented regardless of which approach. So again, all of the regions need to follow certain standards so that we can have a consistent system among all the regions. That can be accomplished in different ways, but the objective is the same, that we want to have a statewide standards. We can accomplish that through perhaps advisory committee with memberships from state, federal, and local or regional representatives, so that we can make sure that, that all the regions are using consistent standards. Now the differentiation between them comes in terms of, as Imad mentioned, in terms of who's responsible. So this is really about responsibility of management the system. A central entity or the central approach will be, as the name may imply, it's going to be done by a central entity somewhere, and it will have the advantages of possibly there will be some savings in terms of synergy among all the regions. A regional approach that will be distributed among the regions. Advantages of that is that the local and the regional participants, they are really intimately familiar with their own respective regions, with the local hydraulics and hydrology. They are aware of all the challenges for their respective regions. So that would be an advantage for having a regional approach. A blended approach could have a sort of like trying to get the best of both worlds. For example, we could, the one that we focused on in the report is having the H&H component to be done regionally, but the IT can be done more centrally. So we will have a central system in terms of the IT component, but the H&H can be done at the regional so that we can get advantages of both sides. A federated approach divides the system a little differently. It's based on model use. So the federated approach that is included in the report states that the central entity will be in charge of the LWI models that are being developed now. And the regions will be responsible for non-LWI models, local models that they develop at a smaller scale perhaps. And the IT will be done at a central entity. So these are some of the approaches or the approaches that are presented in the report. And we actually provide details a bit more about the pros and cons or advantages and disadvantages of each one of those approaches. Let's talk a little bit about the cost because that's an important aspect, and then we will turn it on for questions. So Logically, the cost is primarily coming from the H&H piece as well as the IT. So the cost that we will discuss now is that's the cost for maintaining the system in the long run, because that's the running cost that is important. The development, it might be happening as a follow-up phase to the report that you're reviewing right now, and that will be done. It's being reviewed right now by the LWI, and it will be done by the initiative for the development piece. Now it's the important question related to the maintenance. How is that system going to be living indefinitely after that? Next slide, please. So what we did is we looked at all the different regions, identified the number of modelers that will be required to keep up the functionalities that were mentioned earlier in terms of disseminating the models, reviewing changes that have been done. So these people, the H&H modeler, need to have some experiences and knowledge so that they can review the models and approve them and ingest them back into the system. IT personnel, and then also the part about the model updates or upgrades that would require collaboration between the H&H model and the IT personnel. So these are the items we considered while we are looking at the running costs from year to year. We did two different approaches. One, if the management and the execution of that system will be done by staff that gets hired by state agencies or the regional coalitions, or if they contracted out to consultants. And we did our best in terms of getting the average cost for an individual, whether it's a modeler or IT personnel, and that's how we crunched the number to come up with the preliminary estimates that are included in the report. This here is an example for Region 7 that we're talking about today. Region 7 does have 8 HUC-8s, and it actually have a lot of urban populated areas. So we assign that it needs, from our estimate, a 3 equivalent full-time H&H modelers so that they can handle the day-to-day development that happens in the entire region. So that's our estimate for Region 7. It varies from region to other. Some regions have a little bit less than that because they may not have as many HUC-8s, or they may not have as much population density in their respective regions. So that's the distribution here from region to region, and we highlighted Region 7 for us today. Next slide, please. I will talk first. Let's talk a minute about the statewide cost, and then we can focus on Region 7 cost. The statewide cost first. You will notice, number one, that there is the breakdown of the cost from the H&H modeler, IT personnel, storage in terms of cloud storage, additional computational and networking costs, software maintenance, and so on. And you will realize that from the numbers, the biggest 2 ticket items is the H&H modeler and the IT pieces, because that's obviously personnel is typically the most expensive. And you can see that if we adopted a fully central approach for the system that is being done by staff, the annual cost statewide is roughly about $2.3 million. The regional approach is about 2.7. So that's the difference between the two approaches. And the blended approach, it depends on which feature is borrowing, because the blended approach does H&H regional. So that's why the blended is the same as the regional approach here. For the IT personnel, the central approach is $200,000 a year. The regional approach is $400,000 a year. And the blended approach, because it is borrowing the IT philosophy here to be central, is $208,000 a year. So if you add up all the numbers, you will find that on an annual basis, statewide is 2.8 central, 3.2 blended approach, and 3.4 regional approach. So that's the range of cost statewide. And then you can go to a region by region so that you can see the running annual cost. That's the cost for if it's done by staff. If we go to the next slide, you will see the exact same number distribution, but if it is done by contracting it out to consultant, the cost is a bit higher, but because we use the fully burdened rates for consultants, and you will see that the range, the annual running cost is 5.8 million a year for central approach versus 7.1 million for regional approach. And the blended approach is always falling in between the two. And again, if you can look at region 7 by itself, you can again see the breakdown of the cost. And now if it's done through contracting out, it gets pretty close to $1 million a year. So that's the breakdown of the cost for the statewide, so that you can get the big picture about how it's costing for the entire program. And then you can also focus on our region here that we're talking about, region 7 for that cost. So this is the estimates. It is important to remind everybody that the capacity building is a pretty important component of the initiative. And it is a component that we are discussing in the museum plan, because it does bring up some infrastructure to the regions in terms of hardware. That's the capacity that needs to happen at the regional level so that they can be prepared and equipped with the appropriate hardware, technical personnel, so that they can actually manage a system like that. So hardware here, we're talking about some in-house computing facility, as well as the cloud base for storage, technical personnel, whether that's IT, GIS, or H&H modeler. But that's important because it is one of the foundational objectives of the program, is to build capacity at the statewide, at all the regions, so that we can ultimately manage stormwater in a much better and much more informed manner. So that's it, Imad, from our end. Then maybe we can open the, unless you have some closing remarks before we open the door for questions.
No, that's good, Ihab. Thank you. Yeah, I guess like Ihab said, that the costs here were presented for, the great numbers are for the entire state. And then if you want to look at each region by itself, you can get the numbers from the column. Say, I know that there was some confusion early on this particular issue, so I just want to make sure to clarify that 3.4 or 3.2, that's for all the regions combined. But you can see here it ranges anywhere between 300 to about 450 for the different regions. And the majority of that, like Ihab said, is coming from the staff that the regions will be equipped with to be able to manage the models and keep them updated. But yeah, thank you, Ihab. And I guess we'll stop here for questions.
Well, thank you all very much. I thought Dr. Khan would be a hard act to follow, but Dr. Habib and Ms. Ali did a great job. So glad to have y'all here as well and presenting all the information to us, and very important. I mean, this is, the backbone, and this is where the rubber meets the road for our region, for our state. So really appreciate y'all coming on today. For the regional steering committee members, if you have any questions, please come off of mute. For any members of the public, please enter your question into the chat box. Or if any of the panelists are staying on till the end, we do have a public comment period. Maybe if we had a few minutes available, we could ask questions from the public at that time. But I ask regional steering committee members to come off and ask questions, and for the public to enter into the chat box at this time. Thanks, doctors.
Yeah, I have a question, Dietmar. Is Region 7, by the way, obviously, we are the Midway Basin, right in the middle of it. I think my question is, I know that DOTD, maybe I'm a little bit confused, but DOTD is doing the actual modeling at this point in time. I know that at least for Region 7, I don't know if this is statewide or not. So we got 8 consultants doing the models. Really, are we contacting DOTD and their modelers, their contractors, where they are on the model? Because they might be approaching the point where the models are going to be finished. And it's going to be a transition. Every time there's a transition, you have a lot of, it's like being in a storm, so to speak, things beginning to go right and left. So that to ease the transition from the modeling completion to the modeling administration, if you want to call it, there's going to be a period of time of testing like everything else. Are we contacting, is DOTD involved in this dialogue at all? Because they are the ones doing the model. I know for Region 7, if they are or not. But then also, I know in our particular region, we have modeling efforts going on right now at not regional level necessarily, but more a sub-regional level going on for some improvements in some of the parish in particular here in Region 7. So are we coordinating, are we talking with all of these other, so to speak, modeling interests, if you want to call them, to allow for an easy transition from the modeling into the management of the modeling? That's
yeah. Okay. So, Idan, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you? I mean, that's okay. I guess you bring up good points, and I'll comment from my side, and maybe you can add. Or I know Sarah also is on the line. Sarah is working with LWI also for project program management. So yes, of course, DOTD is very much aware and informed, and actually has participated in reviewing this document and revising it, and multiple rounds of reviews and feedback and so forth. So they are very much aware of it, and they are part of it. Actually, if you look at the report, if you look at the cover page, some names from DOTD are on that report. And you're right, they hire consultants for Region 7 and for every other region in the state. So it's not just Region 7. We also send that report to the program, send that report to the consultants, including Region 7, asking for comments on what they see in that report. So their input has been solicited. And I think the process of this public comment period is also to solicit more input from everybody, including consultants, whether the LWI/DOTD consultants or any local consultants, which you are referring to, right? You're referring that you have also local/regional consultants who are doing other modeling there. I like your concept, Damilare, about the transition between the model development and the model use. You're right. I mean, EHAB and I and other folks, also colleagues, are working with the state as part of that technical design and quality, TDQ team. And we work closely with the consultants to make sure that the models are done in consistency and they are completed with high quality. So a lot of the issues that you're talking about in terms of debugging and just making sure the models are happening, we have a rigorous review process, independent review process. Besides what the modelers do already, there's an independent process that we implement to make sure the models are high quality. But however, I think that transition concept between the model development side and then the model use is really important. And I think that's where some of the capacity building could also come into play. There could be some training happening between the modeling development phase and the model use phase to make sure that the local and the regional users will be able to use these models. If you think also that there are efforts happening in your region in terms of modeling that should be reflected into the LWI models, I think the program will encourage you to talk with the modeling consultant. I think there's a process where you can give feedback to the LWI modeling consultants to see, to have that dialogue. So I don't think that's out of the reach. So I'm gonna stop here so that my answer is not too long, but Ehab, feel free, Ehab or Sarah or even Rachel, feel free to add what I said.
I think you covered it very well, Imad, but maybe Sarah does have some comments.
I would just say that as another note of something that we've kind of shared with Nicolette, and we will have Nicolette and the rest of the OCD LWI team kind of pass this along to the regional steering committees. There are going to be some 2-pagers that are developed that will outline the modeling parameters for each region once these work plans for the modeling consultants are finalized. And then those 2-pagers would be presented. And I think once you see a little bit more detail during that presentation, some of these concerns can kind of get discussed in more detail. So we do anticipate those 2-pagers to be kind of forthcoming soon. So that way you can kind of understand the scale of the modeling that's being conducted and where the modeling is being conducted and those anticipated use and capacity.
Thanks, y'all. I think that's, let me see, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I think we had 2 questions in the chat pod, so if we can address those. And then, you know, I think there's probably certainly some more questions, and I also want to keep this on agenda. So if there are additional questions, we can send those directly to y'all. So Ruth Phillips asked, do all the regions vote on this, or will this be decided by OCD or the responsible agency for employing the H&H modelers? So I don't know if that's our museum team or OCD or some combination who wants to answer that first question.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe somebody from the LWI can answer that better than me, but my understanding is the public comment period is, the purpose of it is to get feedback from everybody on this. And I don't know if it's considered a vote. I don't think this is a vote, but and ultimately that feedback will be compiled and synthesized. And I think the program, the LWI program, the governing body of the LWI program, will make some recommendations on the final plan as far as which approach to select, and including governance issues and things like that. That's my understanding of it. If I'm wrong, maybe Sarah or somebody from the LWI can correct me.
I can chime in too. This is Nicolette from OCD. That's correct. So we're soliciting public comment to inform this plan, and what this plan is basically going to be is, so once the researchers have reviewed all of the comments, incorporated the comments, and then we're expecting them to come up with a recommendation, so a recommended approach. It could be, I think it's going to be based off of the comments we receive, but it could be kind of multifaceted recommendation, depending if there's just certain differences among the regions. However, this is a recommendation that the researchers will give to LWI at the state level. And then Imad, you could maybe speak to this, but then we're going to go into kind of a user group phase. So in the user group phase will be to try to implement whatever approach we're going into and test it. And we'll be, the state will be supporting the regions with the capacity building that's necessary to, and I guess by this time, we'll hopefully have coalitions in place. But I think what could happen, it just depends on how the coalitions develop and gain capacity. This, use and function of the models doesn't necessarily have to follow a linear path. It could change. I hope that answers your question, but we're using these public comments to inform a recommendation to move forward. And then that will be preceded by a kind of a test beta phase of implementing this use and model use framework.
Right. Yeah, Nicolette, if I'll elaborate a little bit more on that user group or user phase. So the developing the system itself, the interface and the functionality of the museum system will be done in a prototype phase, where we build a prototype, and then that will be informed heavily by the users, by you all. So we envision that there will be representatives from every region participating in informing the design team of that museum system. I think that's what Nicolette was talking about, developing a prototype and testing it and refining it based on the user needs.
Thanks, y'all. And we are over time on this part of the agenda. And so all of the questions that were already provided in the chat pod, that's all that we're going to address. So if we can do kind of a rapid fire. And I think Becky Bond, your question, I think was just answered by Rebecca. So the public comments intended for anybody, just to let y'all know that she did provide the links to where people can provide that comment. I believe that closes on October 25th. Is that correct? I was a bit confused between 25th. Okay. So the next question is from John Clark regarding the museum and LA DOT modeling within Region 7 for the Amite River Basin. Is there cross-pollination between the different modeling efforts groups, or rather each individual efforts, thus duplication? So if we can quickly answer that.
Regarding the museum and LDT, the cross-pollination between the different modeling efforts groups, or rather than each. Again, I think we encourage, I mean, my personal take on this, I mean, we encourage the conversation between the regions and the consultants. I believe there's a channel for that. I may not be most informed on it, but I think it is important to have that dialogue to avoid, duplication of effort or what have you. Again, I may not be the best person to answer that.
Hey, this is Pat. I'll take a shot, Imad. So the modeling that they're doing in the regions is not going to overlap with the museum work, except to the extent that those modelers, those teams represent the vast majority of the modelers in the state. And so we would absolutely expect them to be commenting on the museum plan, because ultimately the museum plan will define how people access the models over time and how they're maintained and all that. So I don't really see overlap in efforts. Certainly there's overlap in areas of interest, and that's where we would expect these targeted comment opportunities to inform the museum is through getting comments from those consultants and other consultants and elected officials and bureaucrats like me. So everybody that's going to be engaging with those models and flood risk reduction, it should be weighing in on the museum, including those modelers.
And if I may add, this is Ihab. I think
Thanks,
also
Joel.
the museum will house the models that are developed by the regional consultants. So it's the intent for it to keep those models alive and always being updated to reflect reality. So there's definitely synergy there.
Great. Thanks, y'all. And Becky, I apologize. I did not mean to skip your question here. Lakeisha, do you want to come off mute and provide any context, or are y'all following up separately?
Rebecca, if you don't mind, you can reach out to me personally and I'll make sure to connect the dots. I just want another backstory to what specifically we're talking about, so that we can just make sure we get you the support you need.
Okay, I mean, my question was, I haven't heard from the consultants except for once. And then I have a concern because we have budgets and schedules associated with the projects that we're discussing right now with that modeling. So when I don't hear from them, but we're talking about using the data that we're paying for, with our FEMA projects, that we have constraints that we have to work within, and we should be involved in that as the communities that are responsible for it. So those are just some of the concerns swirling around in my head.
Sure thing. I'll be sure to, if you don't mind having a conversation with me, and we'll discuss just to make sure that we are comparing, the understanding of what they're doing versus what you guys are including in y'all's FEMA scopes of work.
Okay.
Thanks, y'all. And if there are any additional questions, I mean, we're going to obviously, we have great relationships with the museum team, so we can send those over to y'all. We'll make sure that everybody gets these slides. So just really appreciate y'all's time today. I know that was really fast. So I think up next we have, we're going to discuss the draft membership structures, where we're at, and next steps in particular. So I'm going to actually toss it over to Pat Forbes.
Hey, thanks, Rachel. So I had a conversation with Rachel last week related to where you guys are on the recommendations for regional governance and leadership. I know that we have every region's input in the form of recommendations, formal recommendations from this summer. And so just wanted to fill you in on what that means at the state level and for the regions right now. Now that we have those recommendations from all the regions, including Region 7, we're moving based on those recommendations toward drafting legislation for next year's legislative session. So at this point, we're writing those up. We're going to put them into some form, and then ultimately they take on a life of their own, and the legislature makes the decision about what that's going to look like. Obviously, that's a time for you guys to weigh in with your legislators about what you think that should look like. But your voice is already being heard through the recommendations that you've worked on and made over the last year.
Okay, hold on.
Rachel told me that y'all are in the process of refining those recommendations in terms of membership, things like that. I guess in my mind, considering that in the next month or so, we'll be developing draft legislative language and then starting to socialize that with legislators, et cetera. It may be that won't be that valuable since none of us knows what the legislation will ultimately dictate that these organizations look like. I'm not recommending that you do one thing or the other, really. Just want to make sure that nobody feels like their work is being wasted. There's a lot of work for us all to do, including at the regional level, in terms of thinking through what do we think legislation should look like for development codes. We've already got the recommendations, of course, on regional governance. We're working on sort of what state governance might look like, also based on input from the regions. But Rachel just asked me to make sure that everybody was aware of where we were at the state level and how that might impact the work that you're doing right now. So I think that I have covered that. So the session, I guess, starts March. We usually try to have legislation drafted and having people starting to look at it before the end of the year. And so, yeah, that's sort of the timing. If y'all did want to continue with recommendations, if you wanted that to inform what we're drafting, that would have to happen pretty quickly, I would say. Otherwise, it might be something that it is information you provide to your legislators about your preferences. So at any rate, Rachel, have I covered everything there?
Yes, I think so, Pat. I just really wanted to make sure that this group was aware of the timeline. Sorry, go ahead, and then I want to see if steering committee members have any questions. Please go ahead.
No, that's it for me. Yeah, are there any questions?
I just have a comment, Pat. I just have a comment. Dietmar again. Do I understand this correctly when you say, Pat, that you want to move forward with the recommendation or no recommendation of Region 7, the steering committee? What it is, we have been discussing this for almost a year. But I want to remind everybody that governance structure was not brought to our attention or my attention until maybe a month and a half ago, about a month ago, maybe, when the first time I saw it. And that created some discussion among our members that they not necessarily agree with that structure. And so the way I understand it, Patty, is that we are going to move along with the non-approved recommendation by the steering committee. And then you are telling us that if we want to change it, we need to go to the legislators when the time comes. Am I interpreting this correctly?
I don't think any of that sounds much like what I said, no. What we have are 8 different regional recommendations that we've got to try to aggregate into a single legislative draft that will then go to the legislature. If your region isn't happy with the recommendation that you've put forward and you wanted to change it, all I'm suggesting is that if you wanted us to consider a different recommendation as we're aggregating all these recommendations into draft language, that would need to happen pretty quickly.
I have a question. So say that whatever approvals or changes needed to be submitted were submitted. Do you have a schedule for that? And then number 2, since you're in the process of aggregating all of these for a state level governance package, are you going to come back to each of the groups and say, this is what's being submitted? Are you okay with this?
No, I'm not. I doubt that would be part of the process. It might be that we're going to get it out there for you to see what we've got so that you can understand what we're recommending and talk to your legislators about whether you like it or not. Does that make sense? I mean, ultimately,
it does make sense, but it
winds up in the hands of the legislators, and our job is to do as good a job as possible of meeting all the expectations and recommendations from around the state. And I don't think there was a whole bunch of deviation among the different recommendations. There were some, but our job is to try to match that as well as possible, and then let everybody who's been involved in the process participate in the conversation about what it should ultimately look like.
So is governance and decision-making different as far as authority for, say, a local municipality to manage their land use and to be able to apply for funding and things of that nature?
I'm sorry, can you state that question again?
Is governance different from decision-making? So just a general curiosity question. If in the package that you're ultimately going to be proposing, will that inhibit or prohibit in any way the decision-making ability of leadership of a city or a municipality to make decisions that they need to make as elected officials?
Hey, can I answer that question, Pat?
Sure.
So this is Nicolette. Rebecca, so back in the fall of last year, when we met with all of the regional steering committees and talked about watershed management, what was happening with our existing agencies that were handling watershed management, and looking at where the gaps between what local jurisdictions can do, what regional jurisdictions can do and can't do, and where could the regional entity fit in, fill in those gaps? Where could they provide that missing work that's needed to effectively manage our future risks that Dr. Keim alluded to today? So you'll see in the governance recommendation outlined is what Region 7 has proposed for their work of their coalition. So it does not include anything about usurping any of the authorities of local governments. Those in the enabling legislation will not involve removing any of those local authorities. But there will be authorities granted to the region that the regions may or may not use. But I don't think it will, especially from what Region 7 recommended, there's not any take from local authorities for management. What we're trying to do here, what we've been trying to do here, is talk about how we can work together. That's governance. It's us making decisions together across political boundaries, so that we can all protect our constituents, ourselves, from the flooding risks that we're 100% going to be exposed to this year, next year, and in the future because of live.
Yes, and I completely understand that, and I completely agree with it. And my concern is twofold. One, I would be interested to see what those additional authorities are that are granted. And number two is it already takes, in the eyes of the public, an exorbitant amount of time to implement flood management procedures, protocols, mitigation, whatever it is we're doing. It takes too long when you talk to the public. And I'm sure everybody on this phone call understands that when you're in a public facing scenario, when you sit down and talk to people, they're like, why does it take so long to get this stuff done? So when we're talking about adding additional layers of bureaucracy to that, we need to be cognizant of what it is we are doing, because we do not need to make things take longer. We need to be looking at how we can enhance and improve our processes. And that is a deep, deep concern of mine, because I don't want to see something that takes 6 months now turn into 8, 10, 12 months to process.
I think your concern was echoed by a lot of the members on the steering committee when we had a lot of these discussions about what are some of the issues that we have currently with our current ways of handling watershed management. And what you brought up, I think, is a shared concern. If anybody else wants to chime in, feel free.
Yeah, I don't think that any of the regions recommended that the regional authorities were going to have the ability to wrest control from local governments for projects. I don't think anybody, any region recommended that. And remember, our only work here is to try to, as I said, aggregate all those recommendations into something that looks as close as possible to representing all of them. And then it's the legislators' job to finalize that. And that's going to be based on what they hear from you guys and the other people around the state who are engaged in this flood risk reduction effort. So it's not like we're going to make a decision and then hand that down. We don't have that power.
What I made reference a while ago is not to the authorities that is shown in the screen. Those things were approved a long time ago. My concern is the latest addition to this, which is structure, governance structure, which puts two committees together. They call them a voting committee and a non-voting committee. The voting committee is of about 17 people that are not elected officials, not a single one, with different levels of expertise. And then as a technical committee or under that committee is the non-voting committee, which is composed of many people, including elected officials. That does not make any sense to me, Pat, honestly. Nonsense whatsoever.
Well,
Executive
So can I
I will
pause
go
this?
back.
should be the
Yeah,
elected
let me
officials
go
and a
back to the
combination
first
of
thing I
other people.
said, if I might, Dietmar. The first thing I said was, I'm not sure, I'm not recommending that y'all do one thing or another. I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but it doesn't make that much sense to me for you to spend a bunch of time defining voting and non-voting committees when we don't know what the legislators are ultimately going to make these authorities look like. And that may be defined, they may decide to define that in the legislation, at which point we would have wasted our time.
Yeah, and I also want to add to that too. I think there's a lot of confusion around the intention of the point of discussion for membership structures. That was never meant to be a discussion, first of all, on August 26th, that the steering committee was voting on. That was never a voting topic. It was meant to be a point of discussion to carry this work forward. So that wasn't ever going to be a recommendation to the state ahead of this legislative packet. That was meant to be kind of another pathway by which we would have discussions with this group to see what would make sense as a membership structure after that legislative session. So if, and that's an if, right? If that legislation that Pat is talking about passes and there are regional entities stood up, what might we as a region want those to look like? So I think there's that particular item that I want to bring to attention. And the recommendations that Pat's talking about wrapping into that legislative packet that he referred to, that is the governance recommendation specifically. And I want to make that very, very clear. Anything that was proposed during the August 26th meeting, that's not being incorporated into that packet, right? It was this governance recommendation that was recommended and adopted unanimously by the steering committee on June 29th, right? So that is not anything that was going to be proposed to be put into legislation. And I think there was a lot of confusion that was happening around that particular conversation in particular. And I don't know where the points of origination for that was, but I'll take some ownership in not making that especially clear to this group.
Yeah, I think, the transition team, I think Region 7 has been probably ahead of the curve of most regions across the state as far as what our initial timeline was given to us by the state. So we had these milestones and we would hit them. And I think the transition team put a lot of work into presenting something to the regional steering committee as an idea, and it was taken as we're voting on this and this is how it's going to be set up. Again, transition team got really beat up on that, and they worked a lot of time. I was not part of that committee as a chairman, and it got people involved, and then it got more people involved with the transition and how it may be structured. So yeah, I agree with you, Rachel. And to another point, look, as someone who works in St. Tammany Parish, I am definitely I have to deal with the public every day. I'll be probably working until midnight tonight at a zoning commission meeting. So I get it. We don't want to take more time, have more bureaucracy. What I think this would do is for those that don't have the capacity, so instead of extending the timeline, maybe this will actually shrink the timeline by us working together, having these additional resources and being able to tap into just capacity that, even St. Tammany, we have PhDs, we have modelers, we have GIS. I mean, look, we need more, I'm not gonna lie, and we could definitely use the capacity and to, work with our fellow parishes in the region. So I'm not looking to extend any timelines, I'm looking to reduce them and get a better product at the same time. So that's kind of my 2 cents on, where we are.
Thanks, Ross. And a couple of things. One was a question, what was the point of spending time on that? I don't mean to suggest that it's wasted because your legislators are going to be asking, what do you think about this? They're ultimately going to do that. Or they may leave that open in the legislation, and then it is going to be a decision you have to make, and then you will have spent time discussing it. The other thing I want to add to what Ross just said is, yes, the one objective would be shortening the timeline, not lengthening it. But the most important objective of having the regional organizations in place, whatever form they take, whatever authority they have, is ensuring that the decision-making around watersheds involves all those people in the watershed together who share that risk. So it's the same as from the day we started.
Ruth Phillips. So I just wanted to clarify quick, and I did meet offline earlier this week with TRPC, which I really appreciate. And so it sounds like the governance structure, which, yeah, good job on my monitor, but I pulled it for all the regions. And so it looks like you're going to go through all 8 regions of their governance recommendations. This has nothing to do with who the voting members are, non-voting members, anything of that sort.
Correct.
And so really it's up to us to kind of review all the other regions, decide what we like and don't like, and maybe push that to our legislators, and also say, you know, we want a seat at the table for voting. If you all start having those conversations to include it in the legislation, here's our point of view. Is that an accurate understanding of how this is proceeding?
Yes. Yes. The only thing I don't have a definitive, we don't have a date set for when we expect to be able to produce that draft legislation, but I know that we're going to be working on it shortly.
Pat, may I ask a quick question? I'm a volunteer member of the Transition Committee and also an environmental attorney. I'm going to ask a question that sort of reflects my legal.
John, I don't.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just, we've been getting a little like, you know, I think steering committee members can come off mute during this time. So if you've got questions, comments, put them in the chat pod, John, or save them for the public comment period, because I do want to address, in particular, John had asked, you know, why aren't we discussing the membership structures? This is a part of that conversation, John. And I think since we're at 317 now, I want to ask Ross and Bridget and the rest of the folks on the steering committee if we want to extend this call in particular, because I think that we might need some more time.
I have a pretty hard deadline for 3:30. That's just me, but I'll defer.
Is Earl got a pretty hard deadline too?
I've got something at 3:45, so I can stay on 15 minutes. That's it.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that we'll need to end still at 3:30. So I guess my question for the steering committee then becomes, based on the information that's been provided to us today by Pat as well as other folks at OCD, are we wanting to continue this discussion on membership structure specifically for the purpose of being able to offer something to the states prior to that kind of timeline that Pat had talked about, or what is, you know, I guess I'm just asking y'all how you would like to proceed from here.
I would, you know, considering that I'm looking at the agenda, and based on our prior meeting, our discussion was to be about draft membership structures. And then we started talking about governance. So I just, you know, with all due respect, think that based on our last meeting, there are some concerns. And if we could get on the same page as we move forward to the legislature about our membership structure, I think that's important. And if we got to put it off to another meeting, then we'll do. It sounds like everybody's, has things hard, fast to do after this meeting. So that's my recommendation, is to put it off and not make a decision yet.
Rachel, do we have any votes scheduled for today?
The only thing we got to do are adopt meeting minutes. That's it.
Yeah. So we had no other voting today as far as structure or anything like that.
What are some other thoughts? I heard you loud and clear, John, that maybe we want to talk about this at the next meeting. What about folks from St. Charles Ascension? Oh, go ahead.
We may not be voting today, but according to Pat, we're going to draft some language to send to our legislators for our governance, which I assume that that's also going to include our voting structure and membership structure. So it's almost like as if a decision's being made and proposed without hearing from getting on the same page. So that concerns me.
I second John's move, and we'll have plenty of time to have another meeting. I don't believe that this is so critical. I mean, my gosh, it is so important. It is very critical. And I say we need to get this resolved. I don't want to go and with all respect, I don't also want to go to send things to the legislators without us. We were structured for the purpose of providing that information. And when that was put in front of me a month ago, I said, where does this come from? Never talked to us about it. Let's correct it. Let's send it. And if the Watershed Initiative wants to send an alternative, let the Watershed send an alternative. That's all what I have to say. But I back John's motion, whatever.
Okay, this is Bridget, and I just wanted to say that regarding John's comment, I was under the misimpression that we aren't drafting something to send to the legislators, that OCD is the one that is drafting something for legislation, but us as a steering committee isn't, and we're giving our thoughts and feedback to OCD. That's what I was thinking all of this was for, is to give it to OCD, and them being the state agency would be preparing some packet to be provided to the legislators for possible introduction at that point in time. So I don't think us as a committee, I know you as chair, vice chair of the committee, there was never any intentions of us as an entity, as a regional group, to have something that we have to provide or that we would be providing to legislators. We use that we use our meeting time to give guidance and suggestions and feedback to the Office of Community Development at state level, who would be the vehicle and the agency that's entrusted with watershed suggestions to legislators. Am I misspeaking? I don't know, Pat, if that's
Thank
correct.
you, Bridget. Yeah, I'm still on. Let me boil it down to a few sentences. One, we have everything we need from your region to develop our draft language, because we have those same recommendations from 7 other regions, and we'll combine all those into, as best we can, a single approach that we will draft, and then the legislature will take over from there. What I did say about the legislature is, as people interested in this process, you may want to have things available to you that you go talk to your legislators about. And that's all I'm suggesting, is that if you develop some more detail or some alternative thoughts to what's in those recommendations, those are certainly things you can go talk to your legislators about. But we have everything that we need from Region 7 Steering Committee to draft our language relative to regional governance, because we've got recommendations from every single region, including 7.
So,
Thanks,
so
Pat. I think
Pat,
this is going to have to be the last comment. We have to just move on so we can end on time.
Okay, so Pat, does the draft governance structure include the membership structure? And is the membership, and if it is the membership structure based on what the transition to?
No, it does not, John. I'm sorry to cut you off, but in the interest of time, Rachel put up there the recommendations that y'all made back in July. That's what we have. And we've got similar documents from every single region. It has nothing to do with who the membership is or any of those other things that y'all have been talking about subsequent to submitting your recommendation.
You say what we have is what you have, what the transition team provided, or we kind of came out of that meeting.
No,
we kind of came out of that meeting.
what we have is what was presented to the Watershed Council, and I think it was our August meeting that the Region 7 did in July. Other regions did it in July, others before that, but we got all of them presented to us in August, and that's what we have.
All right, thanks, Pat. Thanks, John. Rachel?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. And we have we have in the chat pod the recommendation that Pat is referring to, which was the regional governance recommendation from Region 7 specifically. So those are the documents that they have. Again, the purpose of the transition team was to kind of think forward. So if there's legislation that's passed, what could that look like? And to begin a discussion with this group around it. It was not meant to be a recommendation that ever went to the state to inform legislation. So apologies for the miscommunication around that in particular. So, you know, I'm still extraordinarily unclear about where we're at with regards to moving forward on the membership structures, because I'm hearing from a very small group of people right now as to how they want to move forward on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually send out a poll question to our steering committee members.
This is Ivy, and I have to get off the call, but it sounds like we were advanced. We were an advanced group. We're ahead of our time. That was not necessary and asked for us right now. So I say let's put a pin in it for me for now, and then so that's my 2 cents for now.
Thanks, Ivy. I'm going to send a poll after this meeting to hear from the steering committee specifically if we want to have another meeting on this. If we want to have another meeting on this, I am definitely supportive of that. I will create the container for facilitation and space to be able to do that, but I want to make sure that I'm hearing from more people than just the people who have spoken up on this call. We have 17 steering committee members, and I've heard from, I think, five or six if I'm counting correctly. So we do have a public comment period, which I think the other thing that we can do here, well, actually, Ross, we want to go ahead and adopt the August 26th meeting minutes, then we'll move into public comment.
Sure. Do I have a motion to adopt August 26th meeting minutes?
Motion to adopt.
All right, motion by Ruth. Do I have a second?
A second, Earl.
Second from Earl. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes.
Great. Thanks, Ross. As a reminder, send me your ethics certificates, please, soon. And this is a tentative date, so some folks filled out the doodle poll. Thank you. This looks like this will be the next time. However, given the conversation today, we might move that up if we need to. We might move it back. So just know that you're going to get a poll in your inbox, and we're gonna figure out what specifically the steering committee would like to do with regards to this discussion. And I think the other thing that we have lastly is the public comment period. So would love for folks who are members of the public or really anybody, now's the time that you can come off mute and be able to provide public comment. We also have a pluses and deltas board, which I will copy this link, and you can actually provide feedback that way as well. So I'm going to be quiet for a minute. We ask that everybody keeps their comments to 2 minutes or less.
All right. I say that about ends it.
Yep, I'm not hearing anything. If anybody would like to email me, I'll put my email in the chat pod and we can follow up on anything. And certainly for our steering committee members, we will be following up via email because we know that we have the unresolved agenda items from today's meeting. So again, thank y'all for your time. There are a million other things that you could be doing with this time. So we just appreciate you being here.
Yeah, and always I want to thank Rachel and her team over at CRPC, OCD, and everything that they do. Had some great presenters today with Dr. Kime and Maselli and Habib. So some great informative panelists we had today. And so really enjoy those. So if we can keep those rolling through some of our meetings, depending on the agenda, maybe not have as many, but again, they were very, just great and informative to have. So other than that, Rachel, Bridget, did you have anything?
I don't. I just want to thank our speakers earlier today too. That was great information. I look forward to getting copies of those presentations so I can kind of delve into them a little better. I do happen to be a data nerd, so I would really like to look at that a little further. And I look forward to next month's meeting. I think we're going to be getting some updated information maybe from Dewberry, who is the contracted agencies that are doing our modeling. So it'll be interesting to hear their take on where we stand with some of those models as well. So.
All right. Thank you, Bridget. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that.
All right. So I heard Bridget, but who wants to second it?
I'll second it, Ruth.
Who was that? I'm sorry. Ruth. All right. Got it. See y'all next month. Have a great one. Enjoy your cleanup. If y'all need assistance, Rachel's always a great facilitator and find anybody. So as y'all clean up from Ida, help's on the way. So just ask. Sorry, Rachel, I'll put you on that. See y'all later.
Literally what I'm here for. Thank you.
Right.